Good morning. We are live on YouTube on the Falcons Podcast. We want to bring in our Facebook groups as well, so we're going to bring them in real quick, and then we'll get started. It is Monday after a long weekend of NFL draft. Gorgeous weekend here in the Southeast. I hope everybody had a great time. Welcome in, everybody. This is the post-NFL draft edition of the Falcons Podcast. It is Monday morning. The sun is shining. It's going to be a gorgeous day in the Southeast, and the Atlanta Falcons, for better or for worse, turned a lot of heads around the NFL, around Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. There's been some rationalizing and stuff that goes on that happens when there's a shock to your system. And there's, again, I've had an instant reaction. We had a Friday reaction, and then we had days 2 and 3 to really think about this with 7 more picks after the first round and kind of get an idea of the Falcons' strategy. We're going to get into all of that over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. First, I want to say hello to my co-host. I'm Scott Kennedy. This is Nick Kendall over here. Nick, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing pretty well. It was a interesting weekend, to say the least. And now, as the dust settles, we're trying to figure out what happens now. Where do we go from here? And how soon do we start the 2025 mock draft simulators? It was a good weekend overall, and obviously things are going to be interesting for both our teams, taking probably the 2 biggest consensus reaches on Thursday and in the draft in general. But hey, we'll see, because if you hit on quarterback, nothing else matters.
Yeah, that's we'll get into all that. And there's some people in here, the Michael, entertainment luxury, he wants to come in, with the LOL. The Penix Jr. pick at 8 is starting to make a little more sense to you now, Scott. Yeah, maybe, but that's not necessarily a good thing. And we'll get into that. And I explained that pretty well on Friday. Again, it wasn't about the Michael Penix pick itself. It was the overall quarterback strategy that makes 0 sense. And we'll still get into that one as well. And again, the way the rest of the draft panned out, it started making more sense. Quarterback. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Depends on your point of view. We'll get into all of that. First off, we go live on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, so we like having the conversation with y'all. And I want to say hello to some folks that were in here before we even got started, like Coach coming in with a super chat, breaking the ice. He says, morning, fam. Hope y'all got to enjoy some of the weekend. Gorgeous day of baseball, travel baseball this weekend. Unfortunately, my son ended up being sick on Sunday while his team played really, really well without him. So he needs to get healthy and get back to work out there. So he was home. I went over and watched over at East Cobb Baseball and watched about 5 hours of baseball and had a good day yesterday while we were, churning out content. So great weekend. Hope you had a good weekend too, Coach. Want to say hello to Atlanta Connor, ATL Connor. I really don't see this team getting more than 7 wins again. Okay, 3 straight 7-win seasons. We said for the most part last year with the schedule they had, and this is one of the reasons that Arthur Smith got fired, if you've got Kirk Cousins, and we said this before, Kirk Cousins was really even a twinkle in Arthur Blank's eye. If Kirk Cousins is playing for this team, it's a playoff team. They probably win 11 games or so. They're probably still a first round out because they've got way too many holes or pass rush isn't good enough, et cetera, that they're just not a contender, so to speak, but they're a contender with that schedule in the NFC South. So I still think they're considerably better than a 7-wins team, but the problem is that the schedule is never going to be easier than it was last year, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, you have to hope that you upgraded in competency in last season. I mean, we talked about it. Going from, what would you say, Ritter and Heineke last year, a D- room, to probably a B room at worst this season, on the surface should upgrade you 3-4 wins just alone. The quarterback has an exponential impact on the rest of the roster. I would argue going from a C player at edge to an A player at edge is not as valuable as going from a C player at quarterback to a B player at quarterback, just because of just how important they are in the rest of the roster and your ability to compete. So I see them hanging around. I would put their over under at 10.5. I don't know what Vegas has them at right now. Maybe
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yep. 10.5 wins.
I think 10.5.
So 7 wins again, and their heads are going to roll. Probably won't be Raheem Morris.
No,
but it might be Terry Font if they win 7 games this year. It might not be. It won't be Raheem, but it might be. It might be Terry Fontenot. Got a couple more supers coming in. I want to hit on Curtis Case here in a little bit. I kind of want to use yours as a transition to talking about this after we say some of our hellos this morning. Because Victor says, "Good morning, Scott, Nick, and Falcons Nation." That's all, y'all. I'm okay with the Penix pick. I see both sides, but I think a lot of people are blowing it out of proportion. I think we'll be okay and still did well. I don't really care what Mel Kiper's draft grade of us was. These guys get stuff wrong all the time. So it wasn't just Mel Kiper. Mel Kiper is just probably the biggest and most famous name. But I looked at the three main sources I look at when I look at analysis. I'll look at NFL, I'll look at ESPN, and I'll look at PFF. And it was unanimous. The Falcons had the worst draft. The second, they tied with the Cleveland Browns, I think, on NFL.com. And that was it. Otherwise, it was 32 of 32. Now, Nick, what does that necessarily mean for this Atlanta Falcons draft class?
Honestly, I think the grades are a little bit more performative and content-based than they are actuality. These teams have their own grades. I mean, the example will always be Patrick Mahomes' pick getting lambasted. Oh, they just made the playoffs. Alex Smith looked great, and you traded up for an air raid quarterback from the Big 12 who's never won a playoff game in the history of the division. So I think it probably does at least have some impact on the overall upside of the class, perhaps, but it's not like the consensus big board or anything like that where we know there is some predictive power. I've yet to see something where like the consensus grades or grades in general are very predictive on the outcome of players. So it kind of hurts to have the image, right? But until the games are played, I really just view it as fluff. And I mean, I appreciate them because we're in the content machine. God bless them because we have stuff to talk about and pick apart. But I don't put much weight on it other than entertainment.
And Curtis Case comes in. This is the transition spot I wanted to use. He says, "Good morning, Scott and Nick. I concluded that I'll just have to have faith and trust the process and withhold judgment until after the season. I added the S, seasons, play out." Curtis is a longtime Atlanta sports fan. I do not have faith. I do not trust the process. I am willing to have patience on this, but good Lord, man, especially if you grew up when I did in the 80s with 12 lost seasons and 100 lost seasons for the Atlanta Braves, the last thing you want to hear is trust the coaches, trust the process. This is a team that's lost had six straight losing seasons, hadn't made the playoffs in a while, 7 straight 7-10 seasons. I don't trust the process. I'm willing to be patient before completely judging the draft class. Now, the process, I passed judgment on that last week. Y'all were here. Y'all saw it. But as far as the draft grades themselves go, draft grades are about instant gratification. Okay, how can this help us right now? Or do I find I need a quarterback, I got a quarterback. How are you filling needs right now? If I'm looking at this Atlanta Falcons draft class, I'm filling an instant needs and how many contributors you're going to get for the 2024 seasons when you just spent $100 million on a quarterback, 36 years old in 2 years to win now, this class is an F. It's an absolute F and F is what it is. And the reason why, there just aren't any instant impact players on here on paper. Again, you withhold judgment on this, but when you go into this draft class, Nick, you're looking at, what do we say the Falcons' biggest needs were? Edge, corner, safety, wide receiver 2. There's 4. And then I can also throw in maybe an offensive tackle with, 32-year-old Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry being a turnstile. You didn't address pass rush until the 3rd round. Nick, how successful are you getting edge rushers in the 3rd round historically compared to, up top?
It depends on what you mean by success. If you can have a rotational player, you can find those day 2. But as far as a true impact Pro Bowl type, I mean, I went back, I think, God, I wish I had the data in front of me. But I went back and looked at the PFF top 10 grades, every player at edge for the last 5 years. And I think it was something crazy, like 80% of the guys were former first-round picks. Really, it was like first-round picks and Max Crosby. Other than that, if you really want a difference maker at the edge rushing position, offensive tackle and edge, pretty much it's round 1 or bust.
Cornerback 2, didn't get one at all. Okay. Safety, didn't do that at all. talked about the third round where you can typically get those type of guys, and you traded away a third-round pick for a defensive tackle who, in my opinion, defensive tackle is arguably the deepest position you've got. Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, and Taquan Graham, Zach Harrison, and other defensive linemen. Those 4 defensive linemen were good, especially the interior guys, the true interior guys in David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett. So if you're looking at draft grades and you're looking for instant gratification, this ain't it, dude. This isn't the class. Okay? Now, let's flip the switch. What is a draft class for? Is it for the now or is it for the future?
It's about the future.
It's about the future.
Obviously, the further you get from the first pick, the more about the future it is. But it's about laying foundational pieces, especially if you're talking trenches. It's nice to have day 1 impact, but if you're talking trenches day 2, really it's like year 3, year 4 of their contracts where it's like, okay, now we need consistent contribution from you. So for your Ruke Orhorhoro pick, very good athlete, still really young, crazy tools. I mean, just not just the athleticism, but the size and the length. By 2026, you're hoping that he's a real difference maker at defensive tackle in rotational year 1. I don't know if I trade up for that, considering there is the defensive tackles available. That's a different conversation, but that makes sense. Braylon Trice, I don't think he's an overall. There's a reason he fell to the 3rd despite the production, but he can be a high floor player. And then the other, Brandon Dorlus, inside-outside kind of guy. So, I mean, I understand what they're doing here, Scott. You didn't walk away with the true impact pass rusher at the top, but you did lay a pretty good foundation as far as the depth, the rotation, the overall health of the defensive front. I mean, you raised the floor of that room by a lot, in my opinion, in this draft process, and hopefully gives you a chance to build off of that and grow off of that the next couple seasons.
Yeah, so if I'm building a team, one second, let me bring in my Facebook groups here. If I'm building a team, let's just wipe the slate clean and say I'm building a team from scratch, and I say, okay, I got my quarterback, and I got the trenches, 3 defensive linemen. Okay, I get that. Does that fit the needs of what this team needed to compete in 2024 and 2025? No. That's where the draft grades come in. You went and got your quarterback in free agency. So when it comes to how do you grade the draft, it's impossible to accurately grade a draft after the draft. You need at least 2-3 seasons down the line before you can look back and say, okay, hit, miss. And that's the discussion about Michael Penix. Okay. How can you, if Michael Penix turns out to be worthy of a top 10 pick, then it was a great pick. You're set at quarterback for the next 10 years. The problem I have is it absolutely goes against why are you spending money on Kirk Cousins?
Yeah.
It totally, I put it in writing. They drafted as if this was buyer's remorse right off the gate. They've made a lame duck of Kirk Cousins before he even takes a snap. So you take Michael Penix, you draft trenches. Those are all draft picks for the future. You did not help yourself one bit for 2024, which is okay. You've got a brand new coach. He's got some runway. Okay, where's the 3-year plan? Remember where this team was supposed to be in year 3? Well, in 3 years, if Raheem Morris isn't winning and winning big, he's going to be gone. So you're setting it up for 3 years. I'm not going to be judged based on how I do this year. But every single move the Falcons have made since March makes the idea of signing Kirk Cousins to $90 million guaranteed moronic. Every move they've made has made signing Kirk Cousins look worse. And that's the initial reaction. That's the gut reaction I had last week. You can't take that back. You can't, that's already been done. So you've got a chance to try and build on what you thought was the right move in March when you signed Kirk Cousins, and you didn't. You didn't at all with this draft. And that's where the bad grades are coming in. How this draft ends up playing out will be how this draft is graded down the line. How this draft is graded right now is based on the potential instant impact contributors you got in this draft. And on paper, you got none. None. That's my gut reaction to this draft. It's for the future. I'll hold off judgment on that. For 2024, none.
I would argue that Ruke Orhorhoro, with his athleticism and profile, he is going to be a contributor this season. I know that, interior defensive line wasn't a gaping hole, but I could see him.
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm coming out of my 2024 draft. Give me your Ruke Orhorhoro thoughts.
He is a still extremely young player, did not start playing football until his junior year of high school, and he is an athletic specimen. Just under 300 pounds with 34-inch arm length, tested extremely well, looked great at the combine, 4.89 40 for that size. Just doesn't, he's like one of those defensive tackles that doesn't look like a defensive tackle because he carries it so well. Just a really good body type for that kind of thing. He played mostly 3 technique at Clemson, but really they utilized him all over the line. I mean, you saw 0 technique all the way to 9 technique, and he's still working on his technique, but a lot of times he could win on athleticism, burst, power alone, which I think that's promising, honestly, compared to some guys who are just more purely technique. There's a lot of potential there to still improve the things that can be improved. So again, not always the most productive there at Clemson, but I mean, did have 5 sacks this last season, 8 tackles for loss, not bad for a interior defensive lineman, and also was considered the leader of the defensive line. So he's I think he can 1 gap, I think he can 2 gap as well. He's going to make his way on the field and have some flashes without a doubt. Just needs to continue to work on pass rush moves, leverage sometimes, things that you say a lot of times about more raw athletic guys. But I would be pretty excited about Orhorhoro. He is speed to power. I mean, just he can get after it. There's a reason why pretty consistently I was mocking him to the Broncos 76 when he was there. I'm like, this is a good value. I expected him to go about 50, honestly, because he was still pretty raw. But I mean, he's probably maybe my favorite pick of your class, even though it looks like a reach. I like him.
Yeah, and Edward Brown, I'm not going to call him a reach. Again, a 300-pound guy with tools like that, they don't grow on trees. So I'm not going to call him a reach. I will say you had bigger needs to fill. And like you said, Cooper DeJean was right there, and so was Kool-Aid McKinstry. That if you wanted to go corner, this draft is going to be a whole lot of what ifs. Wait a minute, you didn't take this guy, more so than usual because you didn't go after needs. You did things that didn't necessarily make sense in the now with your corners, with your wide receivers. You traded away that 3rd round pick. You know who was available when the Falcons were supposed to picking in the 3rd? Roman Wilson. You don't think I'm going to be watching Roman Wilson to see how he does based on, that wide receiver 2 out of Michigan, Roman Wilson? But coming back to what you said, Nick, push back a little bit on Orhorhoro. Again, I like the pick. He's a developmental guy. He's for down there. He wasn't all that productive despite the tools. Does that sound like a guy you can count on to be an instant impact in 2024? Are you coming out of this draft telling me that your most impactful player is a backup defensive lineman for 2024? Then you just made my point for me. You didn't get anybody that is going to be an impact player for you in this draft in 2024.
I'll still push that against that a little bit. We've talked about it on here a lot. There's no position that rotates more than the defensive line. So even though, let's say he's only getting 40% of the snaps, 50% of the snaps, that's a lot for an interior defensive lineman. You need your 2 deep to be good there for that unit. And he's versatile. He's going to find a role. Again, he can play 4-eye, he can play 3, he can play 1. And I think he might not be a true impact guy as a pass rusher out of the gate. That's the area where he needs to work. But as a run defender, he's pretty impressive. And that's something that I think is going to play day one with the athleticism and the length, especially if you're 1-gapping. He is disruptive that way. Finishing and the overall clean wins with his hands, those need work. I agree, but you still can be impactful. Now, is that a reach for 35? Maybe, but you're talking trenches. A lot of times that's more developmental. So I get what you're saying, especially with the picks that you had, walking away with that. Like if Denver walked away with that round 3 and took a, backup quarterback round 1, I'd be like, man, you'd hope for a little bit more on paper, immediate impact from a draft class. And as you said, it's more about the long-term health of the roster. But again, I just wanted to come on and talk about Orhorhoro because I do think he's kind of a guy that I would bet on. If I have a type, and he's definitely my type.
It goes back to last week. We weren't knocking the player when the last time we were on. We weren't knocking Michael Penix. We're knocking the fit. Okay, I'm not knocking Orhorhoro. I like Orhorhoro, and I'm not going to say. And first off, we're going to say hello to Michael Ronquillo coming in with a big super chat. Thank you, sir. I'm not knocking Orhorhoro. I'm not saying there's. I preferred JJ McCarthy, but I'm not up on that. That's not the hill I'm dying on and saying why this doesn't make any sense based on the free agent signing of Kirk Cousins. I'm not saying, well, if you wanted a quarterback, you should have taken JJ McCarthy. No, I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm not going to die on the Braden Fisk hill. I just know that I've seen him more. I probably would have gone with Braden Fisk at that spot. I'm not going to die on that hill. The argument I want to make is you're pretty damn good on the defensive line right now. Okay, so again, you're drafting for the future. Okay, that's great, but miss me with this win now stuff when you don't believe it yourself. You're like, okay, we've raised the floor. We should be better, but we don't think we're good enough to really compete, so we're trying to set ourselves up for the future. Okay, well, that's not the message you want to send to this Atlanta Falcons fan base right now. You want to have a little more urgency and not preach patience. By God, Atlanta Falcons fans, you've been patient. And then when you go out and sign Kirk Cousins to $90 million guaranteed, you threw patience out the door. There's just so much more you could have gotten an impact edge, a number one safety to pair with Jesse Bates, and a number two corner, and really done something with that defense. And then if you draft Michael Penix, the offense is still better than it was last year. Now you're excited. Right now you're like, okay, well, we should be better, but I can't wait until Kirk Cousins is gone so we can see our quarterback. It's convoluted. It's illogical. And that's the problem I have with it.
Yeah. But it's logical for me every morning. Cup of Lion coffee. God bless you, Patrick. More roar in every pour. I got my vanilla macadamia in here. He just sent me a bunch of a new box of ground stuff because I tend to have an issue where I forget to grind the whole beans. So that can be an issue, especially with a sleeping baby in the morning. And I'm like, oh, well, I got to do it. It's for the show, Natalie. I have to have the coffee. It's not just because it's my go-go juice. So shout out to lioncoffee.com. I would not be here without them. And that's I owe my life to them. Lion Coffee. God bless you. Thank you so much, though.
They're a great partner of the podcast, lioncoffee.com. And it's delicious. It's Hawaii-based. One of my favorites is one of their standards is their Cafe Honolulu, which is the medium dark roast. And as a partner of the podcast, up through next month, through May 31st, you can get 20% off any order except 100% Kona or Cases, but everything else with our code GoFalcons20. It's in the description of every podcast. Check them out. I promise you will not regret it, Nick.
I mean, I don't. I love it. So good. So coming back to it, see some comments from the chat. I see like Tony Lambert saying didn't matter what defensive player that you could have taken at 8. That guy wasn't going to come in and transform the defense. Falcons have terrible luck drafting edge players. I think that's a little bit of a gambler's fallacy on that one because every single time you take somebody, it resets. I don't think the past history there doesn't impact the future selection. It's like Yahtzee, right? Or rolling dice. Just because you rolled a 2 last time doesn't mean you roll a 2 again. So I don't know. Did you see Chris Ballard in the war room when he got the pass rusher?
When he got Latu, he laughed. So we just got the best effing rusher in the draft at 15. And again, Tony talking about it didn't matter what defensive player would have picked at 8. That guy wasn't going to transform this defense either. Would it have helped more than Michael Penix will this year? Yeah, I don't think you can argue that. And if I'm going to invest $90 million into a 36-year-old quarterback, I want to back him. That signals I have a window. I think I'm in a window. If you wanted to build for the future, man, make a higher play for Russell Wilson for nothing and invest in young free agents or save the money to invest in free agents later when you think you're closer to your window. Get a bridge that costs $10 million instead of 90. It doesn't make any sense. Kirk Cousins makes 0 cents for every move that they have made since Kirk Cousins. That's the problem on this one. And Archangel, he comes in, he says, Penix is way better than McCarthy. McCarthy will suck. Sorry, Scott. That's okay. We'll see. Again, I'm not arguing McCarthy over, oh, you should have taken McCarthy. I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing Fisk. I'll tell you what I would have done, and then I'll see how it plays out. I'm not going to say that you're wrong, I'm right. No. I always say, let me be wrong before you tell me I'm wrong. See, Scott, McCarthy sucked. Yeah, you're right. But not, yeah, this is what I would have done. I'm not grading with hindsight. So I like McCarthy a little bit better, just mainly because of the medicals. I like the athleticism and his ability to throw on the run. I think he's going into a good situation up in Minnesota. And ironically, if it weren't for Kirk Cousins, Nick, if we're talking about, and I saw the guys, I think it was Jordan Reed and Matt Miller on ESPN discuss which quarterback is entering the best situation. If it weren't for Kirk Cousins, I might say Michael Penix.
Yeah. I mean, the Vikings do have a really good offensive infrastructure as well.
They used the argument that he needed to go somewhere that he wasn't ready to play. They used the argument. I'll say JJ McCarthy because he needed a little time to sit. Okay, I don't always agree with that. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I'm not making that discussion before he even shows up in camp. But Michael Penix, you got weapons on the offense. Offense is set minus a quarterback, 24-year-old, drop in, mature. Instead, no, you're not playing. Goodness, again, this team is better than it was last year with Michael Penix at the helm. You didn't. Oh yeah, Kirk Cousins. You shouldn't have signed. I called it buyer's remorse, straight off buyer's remorse, and it put a taint on the Falcons offseason, the way this was handled.
Yeah, and it's pretty wild. We've never seen this level of investment back to back. Like I see Terry Clark said, KC showed the entire league. Well, Kansas City had Alex Smith for a number of years, and he was dwindling. And then they go up and get the quarterback who is young and gets to sit a year and still developing with raw tools. You have Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers. Well, Rodgers was entering close to the end of his contract, and also you spent what was the 26th overall pick on Jordan Love, Jordan Love might be younger than Michael Penix right now. If not, they're the same age.
I don't think he is, but he's again. There's the idea that you can go with. We can rip the Green Bay Packers model to shreds too, as far as why this makes sense for the Atlanta Falcons. That could be another show.
Jordan Love is still very, very young, and
yeah, he's 25. He'll turn 26 in November, so he's a year and a half older.
Okay, so the drafted 3-4 years.
But he's still young.
Yeah. So again, I think I'm fine with both of them individually, kind of like if you talked about Scott, but it just doesn't make sense from a coherent plan for the season. I feel like once you make that Kirk Cousins investment, and putting that much money in for low, as Arthur Blank did, you're in the now. I understand going long term and he's coming off the Achilles, but if you have questions about the Achilles, you probably shouldn't have signed him to that contract to begin with. So you shouldn't be in this situation. Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like to me, and this is just trying to make sense of it, that they went in without like the big picture plan this offseason. And okay, we have a chance to really upgrade Kirk Cousins. Ownership wants, after what we've seen the last couple seasons, wants solidness at the quarterback. Kirk Cousins is going to be solid. And then you go into the draft process, open-minded, which is good. And Michael Penix blows your coach and some other folks away, and you end up taking him as well. But fitting the puzzle pieces together, that doesn't really make sense linearly. But that's the only way I come across with this, with any sort of, okay, I guess it could happen that way. We'll see if it works out. And again, I see comments like, what if Kirk Cousins gets hurt? I always think of Tom Moore.
Those are all arguments against signing Kirk Cousins. All of them.
Yep.
Every single argument for the reason to draft Michael Penix is an argument against Kirk Cousins, which I'm fine with, but let's be honest about that. Yeah. And go ahead. I got a point I want to make real quick with SFC and how it would have made sense what they did, but things changed.
Yeah, again, it doesn't seem like a coherent plan, because you sign Cousins for the now, and Penix, I guess, obviously it's for the future, but was it Fontenot or Morris talking in the combine press or the draft presser saying like ideally Penix won't start until the end of his contract? So
that's not really what he said. And we've played it up on that, and I get it. He's like, listen, If he doesn't end up playing, it means we're good at the position. And
Yeah.
and I understand that. I've said that before. It's like, well, like in recruiting, if I sign 25 stars, but a 2-star walk-on comes in and takes the position because he was better, your team's probably pretty good. It just happened that this guy outplayed. If you're recruiting at a 5-star level and a 2-star takes a job, okay, well, he's probably playing at a much better than a 2-star level. What Fontenot said was, if he doesn't play, it's because we're really good at the quarterback position. Okay, well, that's not wrong.
Yeah.
That's what he said. He didn't say ideally he doesn't play. That would be okay. It'd be silly. It's like, listen, if he doesn't play, then it's because Kirk Cousins was awesome. Okay, then again, the opportunity costs. And SFJ Williams says, you're talking bad about the Falcons like R. Kelly and P. Diddy. I'll have to take your word for it on that one, Jay. But I tell people all the time, you might not like what I have to say, but I'm going to give you a quick response and I'm going to be honest. And frankly, Falcons fans, you know, the Atlanta Falcons have historically given us more reasons to talk negatively about them than positively. We're not talking about a crown jewel franchise of the NFL. So again, going back to trust the process, no, I don't. I don't trust the process. And I've got a lot of reason to back that up, y'all. So do you if you are a Falcons fan. Patience? Yeah. Optimism? Okay. But I'm not just blindly going to say this was the right thing to do. Now, coming back in here, Curtis, because we're on the same wavelength here. And I saw this just as soon as it kind of hit my brain. The way last year played out, this draft was done out of fear, not just the entire offseason. And yes, I grew up a fan during that time too, Scott, just trying to be optimistic. The 80s were rough, man. The one way this makes perfect sense is if Arthur Smith was still the head coach. But who's afraid? What do you have to be afraid of? You've got runway now to rebuild and show optimism for, we got our quarterback, man. We got our quarterback of the future. We're on the right path. There's light at the end of the tunnel. You didn't have to save your job. Arthur Smith, if he was back, had to save his job. If he didn't win year 4, he was done. Dunzales. Gone. He's the one that would have had to have been afraid. Raheem Morris isn't afraid for his job. Terry Fontenot shouldn't be afraid for his job. Well, he shouldn't have been afraid for his job. Once you kept Terry and got rid of Arthur, then the clock starts over. You're going to get a new coach. You're going to get a new draft cycle. Nobody in that room, other than the standard, okay, if you fall flat on your face, the NFL, you're going to be fired, other than no more so than any other first-year coach and GM. You didn't have to work out of fear. You didn't have to, okay, if we don't win 10 wins, we're out of here. We better win 10 wins. Let's go get a better quarterback. So we win 10 to save ourselves some time, to give ourselves some more runway to actually build this team up. You didn't need to do that. You could have, Michael Penix makes this team better. No doubt in my mind. You didn't need Kirk Cousins. That's the problem I have now. If you want to rebuild and build for the future, do it and go all in. Don't waste $90 million of precious salary cap capital on a 36-year-old quarterback. Don't do it. They're half in and half out. That's the problem I have.
And I'm going to put on the devil's advocate hat here, just because how can this work out and in hindsight make sense? Because on the surface, I'm with you, Scott. I mean, we've talked about it, but I think it's better if we kind of step back. Okay, well, how does this make sense? They must have gone into this process and been absolutely blown away by Michael Penix to have done this, because there's no way they didn't consider like, well, we just spent all this money on Kirk Cousins. We did the medicals. We were comfortable with him at the time. And then we came into the process and wow, Michael Penix from the Senior Bowl, we met with him. We saw him throw it. That arm is special on the surface from the velocity standpoint. He can hit any throw on the field. We see him at the combine, has the best throwing session of anybody at the combine. An awesome pro day. We keep meeting with him. He has gone through so much adversity. He won in Indiana, of all places, took a Washington team that was, I mean, Chris Peterson and Lake, you're a defensive back coach. or your defensive coordinator now, had that team horrible his last season before getting fired. And Penix comes in and is fantastic. Throws it on the yard. It's runner up on the Heisman. Just an absolutely incredible story. And again, the raw arm talent that I look for quarterbacks with superhero traits. The arm talent of Penix is up there. He can throw it with anybody in the league. So you have all that. And again, the adversity is overcome. He's been asked to do a lot of different like option routes and stuff. You do have questions about the ability to throw it when he's off platform. You do have questions about the ability to throw it over the middle of the field consistently, but he can spin it for sure. So you go through that process. You view him as a special elite quarterback. When you go through the evaluation, you're sitting there at 8. You're not going to have a chance like this at a guy that you evaluate that way very often in theory. I also think that might even be more so now. I know we just had a trade last year for number 1 overall in Bryce Young, but everybody was trying to trade up this year, and everybody was like, you know what? Kick rocks. We're going to take the guy at the top. So a chance to get up to want to get one of those elite quarterbacks in any given draft, unless you earn that pick, is going to be hard to do. I think even harder now with what we were seeing the past couple seasons. And now you take that guy that you evaluate that way. So again, I don't think it's a coherent plan, Scott, but how does it make sense? I think when I've thought about it, that pathway is the one, at least where it's like, okay, we view him as special elite. We're not going to have chance at special elite again. If it's not now, we're going to either have to pay 3 first-round picks, multiple players to go up and get that guy, or we just sit here at 8 now. And also the other thing is the 8 overall pick is huge, and there's an opportunity cost for that, but it's not 3 first-round picks, multiple players, second-round picks. So even if he doesn't work out, which is crazy to say about the 8th overall pick, but it shouldn't be mortgaging your franchise to the extent that if you did trade up for a guy that you loved similarly and missed on him, if that makes sense. That's when it can really, I don't understand how the 49ers are doing what they did after the Trey Lance trade. It doesn't make any sense. It would be nice
to just piss away 3 first-round draft picks and make a Super Bowl. What's that like? That's how the other half lives.
Unbelievable. That's where I come off, Scott, is again, the cost to get up there, the opportunity cost. It is just 1 pick. Why sign Kirk Cousins if you're in that position? You just must have thought Penix was that special.
One of the reasons they're able to do that is because they've hit on the edge rushers. That defensive line helps them win a lot of games, and they got a good offensive coach. Is one of the reasons. T. Terry's calling a shot. He says Trice is the next coming of Cam Jordan. They're different types of players, but for my guy on who has the best chance to be an impact player out of this draft class, opportunity has to meet talent. The opportunity is at edge from this draft class. That's the opportunity. So it has to be Braylon Trice. They don't want Kirk Cousins. They're backing Kirk Cousins as a starter. If Cousins stays healthy, then it ain't going to be Michael Penix. If Onyemata and Grady Jarrett stay healthy, you can't go in and just say, predicting or rooting for injuries. And, I'll go back to what I said Friday. If you thought there was any chance that you wanted, and I'm going to highlight a couple of comments because I'm just going to repeat myself on this. Every argument for Michael Penix is an argument against Kirk Cousins. If you thought Michael Penix was your guy at 8, and if you thought there was a chance, then you needed, shame on you for not knowing that before you signed Kirk Cousins to $90 million guaranteed. And Dre says, if Kirk gets hurt, people will praise this move. You can say that about any quarterback, any room, any time. And if it wasn't Kirk Cousins, if it was like, okay, this is a guy you've had and he's coming to the end of his career and we can't get out of his contract, we need to get a successor, that's different. Drafting a quarterback at the tail end of Matt Ryan's career makes sense. Signing a free agent bridge for $90 million is too expensive. That doesn't make any sense. And Ryan says, we can't sit here and say the Falcons knew Penix would be there at 8. It was pretty likely, though. And if they needed to move up from 8 to 6 or somewhere along those lines, there was a pretty good chance. Let me see here. This is the way it works. If Cousins brings a Super Bowl in the next 2 years, then Penix picks right up. They'll look like geniuses. I'm not going to bet on that one. But yes, how does this work? How does this work out? Kirk Cousins wins the Super Bowl. That's how it works out. Super Bowl cures all. That's how it works out. But the moves that the Falcons just made over the weekend show that they either believe they're locks to win it or they don't have a chance to win it. Which do you think is more likely? You're muted, Nick.
Sorry about that. I don't know. But yeah, we'll see what happens with the Penix stuff. I would like to get into a little bit more of the draft as well, just because obviously more picks and we gotta keep it rolling here. But it's the Penix stuff and the Cousins stuff just seems not aligned. We got Eddie coming in, says perhaps Cousins will not be ready or recovery is not where he needs to be. Hence they draft Penix.
Another argument for not signing Kirk Cousins and losing draft picks to do it. Again, I could keep showing these.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of these is an argument for that saying you shouldn't have signed Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I agree with you. You shouldn't have signed Kirk Cousins. That was one of the picks was stupid. Which one was it? Signing your free agent to your quarterback or drafting a quarterback at number 8? I'm of the opinion, based on what they've done since then, that they've got buyer's remorse on Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I think that has to be at least somewhat the case. And I think probably Kirk Cousins has more buyer's remorse with signing with the Falcons than that way.
Yeah,
but,
we won't even talk chemistry on this and what how this walks in. You walk into your locker room with your new teammates as a lame duck. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have plenty of offseason talk about it, but like, do you have? I know they're Kirk Cousins coming in as the starter, but like, you probably should have a competition to some extent, right? With the capital that you spent there, and Cousins coming off the injury, and Penix already 24 years old. I mean, tick-tock. We got Devron coming in and says, Scott, you talked about Morris being too cocky in the past. Do you think this draft shows that he is, again, ignoring immediate needs and thinking too far in the future?
I can't actually. This is a great question. I'm glad you brought it up because I wouldn't have remembered this earlier. So we talk about hubris a lot. We talk about the arrogance of coaches. We talked about it with Sean Payton and thinking that he can take the quarterback 6 and turn him into an all-pro at number 12 overall. And we'll get into that here a little bit. You've got Terry Fontenot, who was a defensive back. You've got Raheem Morris, defensive backs coach. You got Jimmy Lake, defensive coordinator, defensive backs coach. You got Jerry Gray, a great defensive backs coach. You've got 4 big decision makers in the room with defensive backs coach. That either tells you one of 2 things. Either they really didn't see anybody they liked, or they think they can make do with what they already have because of their experience. My experience tells me when you've got coaches making the decision makers on personnel, it's the latter. And I think by bypassing cornerback and safety, I think it was a mistake. I do. I think it was a mistake. However, it's not over. You can go get safety now. There are veteran safeties still out there. I'm more concerned about the safety position than I was cornerback 2. I feel like you can hide a cornerback 2 a little bit. I can roll coverages. I can do that type of things. But if I got a big gaping hole in the middle of the field, that's a problem on multiple levels. Now it's time. Who can be the biggest impact player? He's not on the roster yet. It's going to be a safety that they're going to sign. They have to go get another safety. They have to, Devron. Great question.
Yeah, I don't think this has to do with anything of Morris being too cocky or anything. In the end, I think you just fell in love with the quarterback in the process, and they looked at each other and being like, we don't want to live in a world where we don't take this guy. We're going to kick ourselves if we do. So they end up taking Penix, and we'll see how it plays out. Again, Scott, I know you always say that you can say that about any position, that if it works out, it was a good pick. But that doesn't capture the process of the evaluation where you're at. It's, you're not just taking the quarterback to take the quarterback. You're taking one that you evaluated that you believe is special and has a chance to be a difference maker. And there's a lot of risk involved in that, of course, given where you're already at, the opportunity cost of the position. But again, they must have absolutely adored Penix. Doesn't make sense concurrently with the Cousins signing, but those things happened, I guess, in silos, in isolation, 2 different time periods where I guess maybe in hindsight we'll applaud them for not, ruling out Penix because they just took Cousins, because Penix ends up being a superstar quarterback. But now I'm kind of writing fan fiction of what happens in the future. We just don't know. But again, just trying to make sense of it.
2 things real quick. Dave says, if Kirk Cousins was even remotely concerned about the Falcons drafting a potential franchise QB, then I don't want Cousins. When I'm choosing my spot at 36 years old, I want to go to the best chance. Either they're going to have to pay me way over what anybody else would. And I don't think the Falcons did. I think the contract's actually decent. We have gone into that in the past. I think the contract was actually okay. But you come here thinking, okay, I'm ring chasing to a certain extent. I want to win. Okay, I'm coming here. We got a high pick. I can get another weapon. We can add to the defense, do all these things. And how are we gonna take the new shiny $100 million quarterback and then take the next step forward? You didn't. And that's concerning to Kirk Cousins, who, frankly, Atlanta Falcons fans, like I said, you've made a lame duck out of Kirk Cousins before he even takes a snap. We don't care about Kirk Cousins anymore. We don't. He's gone. He's a bridge. He's just a really expensive bridge. He probably would have gone someplace else where he thought he had a better chance to win. So, on that note, Brad comes in. I love this analogy. Why do we all pay insurance in case of an accident? Basically, we've been driving with no insurance. We have a young QB of the future and a veteran right now. We all expected Cousins for only 2 years. No one actually thought Cousins would last all 4 years. Save money 3 years. It's more possible now with a 5-year deal. Brad, when I had a cheap POS car, I got liability insurance. I didn't go full coverage. I didn't go with all the add-ons. I got the cheapest possible damn insurance I could buy. You didn't need the gold-plated Kirk Cousins if you were going to go get Michael Penix. It's about cost. It's about opportunity cost. You don't overspend on Kirk Cousins if you're just looking for a bridge. To raise the floor of the QB room, you didn't need $90 million guaranteed.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll see how it plays out here. I will say we got Brown, if 2 picks, top 35, neither is a day one starter, is a good draft. Drafts, I also think that you shouldn't grade a draft class after year one. You probably need to wait until 3 or 4 years afterwards. Like just now, we're starting to get to the point with the Broncos where it's like, okay, let's look at the 2022 class. Yikes. Not very good. But that's, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. So if neither of them was a day one starter, you can say it's like you had your first test and you got an F, but you still have 3 more tests to go that can salvage the grade. And those tests way more the further you get down the line. So I would say it's TBD. Not a good path if neither are day one starters, but it's too early.
Yeah, and Edward, I'm going to just kind of recap what we talked about at the top of the show about what draft grades are, because looking at ESPN, looking at NFL.com, looking at PFF, the Falcons finished last on their draft grades. Draft grades are about instant gratification. How did you fill your immediate needs right now? And the Falcons didn't. They didn't fill immediate needs. They've got their quarterback for 2 years. They are trying to win with. They didn't get help at edge, really. I mean, they addressed it in the third. They traded up to get a defensive lineman in arguably the deepest position on their team is defensive line. They used a 5th rounder on a linebacker when they've already got 3 pretty good linebackers and some they put some pretty good money into Caden Ellis, and they used a high pick on Troy Anderson. They saw the big gaping hole at cornerback 2 and a big gaping hole at safety and didn't address those at all. Okay. But if I'm going to look at the draft class, nobody's going to care about 2024 in 2027. They're going to look at 2027 and say, Michael Penix is a top 10 starter in this league. Brandon Dorlus outplayed what he was drafted at and is a quality starter. Ruke Orhorhoro is a star. Bertrand took over for Caden Ellis, who was not re-signed after his contract. All those things. That's how you're going to judge the draft class. The immediate grades are based on the now. And the Falcons didn't do much to help themselves in 2024. That's why their grades are bad. That does not mean anything for the future of this team and why you actually have draft classes. Yeah.
We'll see how it plays out. I did want to touch on one player, Scott. My favorite day 3 pick of the Falcons was JT Bertrand. Small linebacker at just over 6 foot, 235 pounds, but has been a tackling machine. And by all accounts, a very, very high character player. Eagle Scout, did a lot of volunteer work, 3-time captain at Notre Dame, led Notre Dame in tackles 3 seasons in a row. Not an incredible athlete by any means, but has been productive. And again, I think somebody that you are going to be very happy to have in your room. Again, not big, not a crazy athlete, but always in the right spot, and somebody who is going to demand excellence and set a tone for everybody else. So again, just the consistency in tackling, production, communication, leadership on that team. I don't think he has a very high ceiling, but he is somebody who I think you're going to be very happy to have him in the room. Almost like, again, cliche, but like another coach on the field. Like it's that kind of person for you. He's also an Atlanta native, so kind of cool to get him back home. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Bertrand for that pick there in I want to say it was the 5th round for the Falcons. I like that pick a lot.
I like the Braylon Trice pick. I do. Yeah. I just wish it had been addressed a little sooner than that. Again, this is a draft that's going to be judged a lot on who else was there. I'm going to be keeping an eye on Roman Wilson. Ryan Adonis says, Scott, I like how you act like every draft pick for every team works out. And you remembered Trey Lance. Yeah, we mentioned him just about 10 minutes ago, saying, wouldn't it be nice to be able to piss 3 first-round draft picks down the drain and still go to a Super Bowl? Ryan, this is ridiculous. Come on. I'm actually giving the team the benefit of the doubt, saying, yes, you did get your quarterback of the future. No, you didn't. You have a draft pick. You've got a potential number 8. If that number 8 busts, then the grade on this is going to stay 32 of 32. That's where it is now. You cannot judge a draft class in year 1. We've talked about all of that. We will look back and see how it goes. The reason why I like more picks, the reason why we talk about trading back and getting more picks is because most draft picks don't work out. And you want to take as many shots as you can. So giving up a 3rd round pick to go up and get a backup defensive lineman is risky as hell. You just put more on Ruke Orhorhoro being good, not to mention the fact that you ignored needs at the cornerback position when 4 corners go off the board 5 picks later. This is ridiculous, Ryan. I love you, but this is unfair, and you know it.
And I will say, already we got to move forward at some point here, obviously with the team and everything, but 2025 draft class is going to be this year. We were talking about, is this going to be a common trend now with all these offensive players? I think next year we're going to see a big bounce back for the defensive players. I mean, just looking ahead, I absolutely love Michael Pierce out of Tennessee, edge rusher. There are 3 defensive tackles that I think would have gone before Byron Murphy this season. I mean, Scott, how long have I been talking about Deion Walker? I adore Deion Walker. You also got 2 defensive tackles at Michigan, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, going to be probably top 15, top 20 picks. Number 1 corner in this class would have been from Michigan this year in Will Johnson. He was unbelievable this year. He's going to be a really early pick. And then Georgia has a pass rusher too that looks pretty darn special, whose name is escaping me right now, but he's not super. He's one of those guys, Scott. I mean, this is kind of how just Georgia does it, but he's one who's like the stats haven't been there, hasn't had like incredible snap count, but then you put him on, it's like, holy bleep, this guy moves different. Michael Williams, 6'5", 265. So pass rushers defense is going to bounce back next season. I don't think you're going to see there's some good offensive tackles next year too. And then also, Harold Perkins at LSU. He's so small, Zach, and I don't really know what they're going to do with him. He had an unbelievable freshman year, and this year they decided, you know what, let's try him at off-ball linebacker, and it wasn't to the same results, but he deserves a shout as well. So next year's defense is going to be a lot of fun on paper. Obviously, we still have to let the year play out, but going into it, everybody's talking crap about the quarterbacks. Probably not going to have the same level of offensive line, but the defense next year should be great. Should be a lot of fun.
Lots of again, the talk of here, the back end of the draft on here, going with some players from Georgia. That was the 3rd player that Terry Fontenot was drafted from UGA. I don't think they drafted 3 players from UGA in the last 30 years. Perkins, I haven't gotten into the class of 2025 nearly as much. Lawrence says, this is for more coffee for Scott. We trust him out this morning. I think they want you to eat crow. I don't think so. We're doing prognostications, Lawrence, and I appreciate the support. When we're predicting the future, there is no right or wrong. There's just thoughts. We'll come back and we'll discuss, hey, was this right or was this wrong? It's going to be hard-pressed for me to ever justify signing Kirk Cousins to a $90 million contract now. The Falcons are going to have to make an NFC championship game. Otherwise, you should have, and then you're going to say, man, one of those defenders sure would have looked good if you don't make it. It's just the process for me was flawed. You didn't have the fear. Going back to, I think it was Curtis says, with this super, you had patience. If you were willing to go with a quarterback at 8 and not trying to just save your jobs, you have patience. The fan base, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but if you had gone and used that money on Kirk Cousins for defensive players and then drafted Michael Penix at 8, there wouldn't be any discussion about Michael Penix at 8 being a strange pick. You'd be excited for it. Instead, it's divisive already because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to spend all that money on Kirk Cousins and then draft a quarterback. So the process has been flawed. Whether it works out or not, we'll see. That's why they play the game. So on that note, we're going to get out of here. I
did want to add one more point, Scott.
Yep.
Backup quarterback. This is just an interesting tidbit, and I think it should not change the level of investment you made in it, but I do think it's still interesting to talk about. Last year, we saw the most quarterbacks take snaps, a quality number of snaps that we've ever seen in football. Now, some of that has to do with like the change of the old guard retiring, a lot of new guys kind of shuffling in and out. But we had a lot of quarterback injuries last year. We saw with all those quarterbacks taking snaps, an uptick in the valuation and the payment of the backup quarterback position as well. So it's not like a super flex fantasy league where you're starting 2 quarterbacks, but I do think that there is more value in that backup quarterback. Now, again, not to the extent where you pay $90 million guaranteed and use a top 8 overall pick, but I think that's at least an interesting tidbit on what the market is doing right now for the quarterbacks. So I think based on that, there is a chance with Kirk Cousins' age, the injuries coming off of, that you might see Penix get some snaps this season, and then maybe that starts the new era for the Falcons here. Maybe the Kirk Cousins era is a really expensive mistake. If Penix is a franchise quarterback, it's kind of going to be kind of like with Trey Lance, like, oh well, we got Purdy here. Let's keep going forward, in my opinion. But again, that's at least that's a tidbit I think that's interesting to discuss in the scope of the league on the whole. It doesn't justify the selection, but worth saying.
The positive takeaways here, Nick, are: did the Falcons get better when they signed Kirk Cousins? Yeah.
Without a doubt.
They did. They're a better team, and they should still be a team that contends for and should still be the favorite for the NFC South going in. Did they get better? Yes. Do they now have to worry about, more so than the development of any rookie quarterback? They've got a plan in place for the succession in 3 years. Okay, I can live with that. That it's just, again, could you have gotten better at the quarterback position without dropping $90 million? It's about the opportunity cost. It's not about, is Kirk Cousins better? Yes, he is. Is Kirk Cousins better than Michael Penix and $90 million invested in your defense? No. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And that's where I am on this. But I want to say thank you to our super chat supercharge that came in. Lawrence came in twice. Thank you. Edward Brown was here. Devron Curtis a couple times. Jay Williams, appreciate you. That feels like the first time you've come in. So thank you for that. Edward Brown, Coach, ATL Connor, and the big one, Michael Ranquillo. So again, reminder, get your Lion Coffee. Check the description. We've got a link and a code to get yourself 20% off through the end of May. We're going to get out of here. We'll be back on Wednesday to talk a little bit more and see if anything else has happened over the next few days. Again, I expect the Atlanta Falcons to go after a defensive back that they can potentially put in as starter. Safety would be the easiest place. We'll see what happens. On that note, y'all enjoy a beautiful Monday in the Southeast or wherever you might be. We'll see you later.
Peace.